that when they called, I dropped everything and came. And one would wonder why. It's because this is a dream that I'm actually seeing alive. A few people, I call them culprits in this room, dreamed together many, many years ago on seeing these two epidemics um, dealt together. And I can't believe that we are here actually talking about this. So it's really, really a pleasure. For me, today is not a job, it's a pleasure. So I will allow us to go through a security briefing. I'm told that is online. But before that, I want to also greet our participants online. We acknowledge you, we see you, and hopefully we will hear you when we start with the discussions. Once the security brief is done, we will then start with our proceedings. Over to you. Thank you very much to our technical team, and thank you to Sassel for hosting us. And my name is Jacqueline Utamrizanzi-Sabira. I am working with United Nations, UN Women. I'm the regional HIV specialist for East and Southern Africa, but with the privilege of being based in South Africa as the forward-looking country in the response to HIV, but also as the part of the Southern Africa countries that are still the epicenter of the epidemic. So I am very honored to be here because, as we know, we are faced with two epidemics all over the continent, but more so in the East and Southern Africa region. In Southern Africa particularly, HIV and GBV are truly still epidemics. And I think having these kind of strategic conversations is key because, as we saw even very recently, I was telling somebody that I'm not happy that I became a prophet of doom. I have been telling people about how we are to solve our issues, and very rapidly so, because everyone else is going to forget about this epidemic, at least the HIV epidemic. And you are seeing what, unfortunately, I prophesied to be true happening in our very eyes. People were blaming some of the administrations that are taking decisions, but if you look closely, it's actually almost everyone. Somebody was talking about the US, but recently we received the guidelines on the EU funding as well. And when you check HIV, SRHR means something else. HIV is not there. So, and GBV, as we know, I was again checking yesterday because I was working on another joint program. And in the 10 most affected countries in the world in GBV, SACU countries hold the 3 best places. So I don't even know if we are really to be proud of that or not. And also, the other reason I'm very happy that this conversation is happening is not only these 2 epidemics feed one another, but they are also driven by the same structural drivers, at least what is remaining of the HIV. What drives it is what drives GBV. So it's actually not very strategic of us to deal with them in separate corners. And hence, I was not given a mandate to talk about that, but I thought I should talk about that. But South Africa is doing extremely well when it comes to forward thinking, at least in policy adoption. This is the only country I know of that has attempted to do an interlinkage of the national strategic frameworks of both epidemics. We actually sell that. By the way, you do very good work, and in the UN, we're very good at selling that work. So we sell that as a best practice all over the world because no one else has actually done anything like that. It was mentioned, it was profiled in last year, 2024, CSW in New York as one of the best practices. So I think we can actually go a step further and do a great implementation of the joint interlinkage policy framework. But my role today is not to do that. And I promise those who appointed me, I'm not going to disappoint you. I won't go out of the mandate anymore. I just wanted to do that as a background. I will call on Ms. Zanele Ngwepe to give us a word of welcome. And also, we are welcoming you, May. We're welcoming you as interim CEO of the GBVF Response Fund. And we are looking at a very accomplished lady because Zanele is an accomplished chartered accountant who qualified long time ago to 2009, and she holds a BCom degree from Wits. And she has held a career with highlights serving as Chief Financial Officer at the Solidarity Response Fund, where she gained valuable experience in high-level financial operations. She also is a member of the executive committee of organizations such as CSIR, NERSA, GrafTech SA, and her extensive track record includes working closely with senior executive and boards, providing strategic financial leadership and driving operational excellence in diverse and challenging environment. I think it's the caliber of Zanele that we need in these dire times in order to actually end up ending AIDS in our lifetime and reducing to ending GBV. Welcome, May.
Thank you so much, Program Director, for the warm words of welcome. So my name is Zanele Ngwepe, and I'm the interim CEO of the GBVF Response Fund. As mentioned, I am generally a finance person taking over the role since Azini left. However, I've now been converted into an impact and a social activist. I would like to welcome you to this very important dialogue that we are going to have this morning on the intersectionality of gender-based violence and HIV. We really appreciate you taking your time to be with us this morning. As mentioned, the two epidemics of gender-based violence and HIV have shaped realities of too many in our society, especially women, adolescents, and young people. These epidemics are not separate struggles, but they are deeply intertwined, fueled by the same structural inequities, cultural norms, and systemic failures. While South Africa has made strides in dealing with both GBV and HIV, it is evident that our efforts cannot remain in silos. The intersection between the two epidemics demands a combined approach, one that is proactive, integrated, and rooted in collaboration across government, private sector, NGOs, global development partners, civil society, and the likes. We must acknowledge that the same vulnerabilities that expose women and girls to HIV also make them susceptible to violence. Addressing one without the other is not sufficient. In addition, we face unprecedented geopolitical challenges that threaten to reverse the progress that we've already made on both epidemics. As most of you are aware of the PEPFAR funding freeze, which has left gaps that necessitate us to shift our approaches and our thinking. This moment actually calls for introspection. We cannot rely solely on international aid to sustain our interventions. We must localize solutions, invest in national sustainability strategies, and ensure that funding for both HIV and GBV programming remains a national priority. To enable that, we need government to take steps to ensure that there's financial support and commitments for both, while we also require private sector to recognize that investing in the eradication of GBV and HIV is not just a corporate social responsibility. It is a fundamental investment in the country's social and economic stability. The double sword of GBV and HIV has cut deep wounds in our society. But just as it has the power to destroy, our collective will has the power to heal. Through integrated responses, shared accountability, unwavering commitment, and we can dismantle the systematic barriers that perpetuate both of these epidemics. So let us all leave here today with words, not just with words, but with a renewed sense of commitment, urgency, and also action that needs to be taken. Wishing us all fruitful deliberations during the day. And I will hand over to our facilitator, and I thank you so much. Thank you.
Much, Zanele, for welcoming us warmly and giving us the order of the day. And I do believe that everyone who is here is committed to do just what you say. We're going to, I believe this is a start of a conversation, actually. It's not the end of the discussions. It's a great conversation we're starting, but these conversations soon will then happen in the trenches when we are actually implementing, as you are telling us to do so. And in order for us to actually set the scene and see why this is such a needed conversation, I have online to help us Dr. Mpumi Zungu, who is the strategic lead at HSRC. She holds a doctorate in psychology from the University of Cape Town, and she's currently a strategic lead and the acting executive director in the Health and Social Capabilities Research Division of HSRC. With 28 years of working experience, she has served as a principal investigator and the chief of party on several national population-based surveys and research projects. She's also an honorary senior lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, School of Nursing and Public Health. And she's the current editor-in-chief of the Journal on Social Aspect of HIV/AIDS, Sahara Journal. And her expertise and special interests lie in the social aspect and social determinants of health, and specifically HIV, GBV, and COVID-19. Mental health, particularly trauma and anxiety disorder, risk and sexual behavior amongst men and adolescents. She has co-authored over 72 peer-reviewed journal articles, 19 books, 15 book chapters, and 15 research reports. And she's going to talk to us, set the scene for us to understand the intersectionality between HIV and GBV. And she will also talk based on the first South African national gender-based violence study, which you know was recently published. So we welcome you, Dr. Mbumi. Please give us the knowledge for us to be able to act.
Thank you so much, Chair, the interim CEO of the fund. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen who have joined us. It is indeed a privilege for me to be asked to present today. I'm having an echo. Okay, now it's better. It is a privilege for me to have been invited to participate. I would like to thank the fund for that. And thank you for bringing the two twin epidemics together and starting this conversation. And some of you might remember that there was a webinar that was organized by UNAIDS that I think started this conversation. And today we are continuing and using data to be able to say more. And I hope that one day when I get invited, we would have also added another epidemic, which is mental health, because I believe that for us to deal with the GBV and also HIV, we also need to talk about mental health. Can I have the slides up, Sean? The presentation that I'm going to give, it's a collaboration from the HSRC, but I'm bringing data from two studies. I know that everybody is expecting the GBV, and that is good, but I think the HSRC is positioned in a unique manner in that we also sit with extensive data on HIV that we've been collecting since 2002. So we felt that it was important to bring the two together so that you can see this intersection that we're going to be talking about. Next slide, Sean. This is always our anchor slide for HIV. Most of you will remember the march, historical march that went to the Union building. Every time we have to center ourselves, we use this slide because it always reminds us why we are doing what we are doing. Next slide. I think both the chair of the day together with the interim CEO spoke a little bit about the issues of funding. And I'm putting this slide up as a thank you for the funds that we've received, but also highlighting where the money for research for GBV and also HIV is coming from, and the need for us to rethink and ensure that these studies will continue beyond the ability of our international donors to be able to provide us with funding for these projects. So that is for the GBV survey. I'm not going to read who were our funders because I want to go through the data, but I want to acknowledge them and thank them for the funding. Next slide, please. Again, you see the US funding our HIV work, PEPFAR, through CDC, and those are our consortium partners who are based in South Africa. Next slide. In terms of how I'm going to present, I'm going to go over quickly the background, talk about why the presentation, show you the prevalence of HIV and GBV, and then show you the demographic, socio-demographic factors for both, and lastly, end up with talking to the risk and recommendations. Next slide. Next slide. So, just to give context, I think a lot has been said about the fact that there is an intersection between GBV and HIV, and this intersection is really complex, and it's also layered. What is it that we know about this intersection? Number one, we know that women who have experienced GBV are 1.5 times more likely to acquire HIV. And this association is something that we've known for a while, that there is an association between IPV and HIV infections. We also know that approximately 30% of women with HIV globally have experienced some form of GBV in their lifetime. And one of the risk factors for HIV is sexual violence that remains high, and women experience it in a context that is also very violent communities, high rates of violence within communities. We also know that women who've experienced emotional trauma can also be affected, in that it affects your autonomy and your ability to make health decisions. And finally, one cannot talk about GBV and HIV without talking about unequal power relations between men and women that make it very difficult for them to negotiate safe sex and use of condoms within their relationships. We also know that gender inequality, traditional restrictive norms tend to exacerbate the risk for HIV. Next slide, please. What did the GBV survey tell us? The GBV survey confirmed that violence starts early in South Africa. The experience of violence starts early. And what you see there, you are seeing a slide that is talking to experiences of adult men and women who were asked, have you experienced physical abuse as a child? And for women, we looked at before the age of 15. And for men, we looked at up to age of 18. And then you can see that sexual abuse is common. Among men, 15.7% of men indicated that they had experienced sexual abuse as children. Next slide, please. Many of you would be familiar with this graphic, which is what we used when we launched the study. And here I want to zoom on two things. The first one is the combined prevalence of lifetime physical and sexual violence, which we found that it was 35.5%, which translates to over 7.8 million women who have experienced physical and or sexual violence in South Africa. That's a huge number. And you will see this number again appearing when we are talking about HIV. And I think, worry is that sexual violence, the rates of it within a period of 12 months are also worrying. We see that in South Africa, in the previous year, after when we conducted the study, about 2% of women experience sexual violence. One might say 2%, very low, but if you translate that at a community level or population level, then you can see that you are talking about over 400,000 women who experience sexual violence in a period of 12 months. So you can imagine, if this continues every year, you are experiencing that, what it would mean. Secondly, you will see that for non-partner violence, the rate was 5.9%, the prevalence. That is over a lifetime. Next slide. This is IPV, and I want to just focus on sexual violence. You'll see that over a lifetime, 7.9% of women, which is 1.1 million women, who have been violated sexually by their partner. When we look at sexual violence, one interesting point is that it is highest among people who are partnered. So women are raped or violated sexually by men that they know. And you see a similar figure also for perpetration of sexual violence, with 7.5% of men admitting that they had sexually violated a woman. I'm going to try and move rapidly because I can see that my time is moving very fast. Sean, please move the slides as quick as you can. So here, the slide is about HIV, and it shows you HIV prevalence in the country. As we stand, we are at 12.7% of people in South Africa living with HIV, and HIV is highest among females at 16.3% versus 8.8% among males. Next slide. So, when we look at gender-based violence, where is it most prevalent? You'll see that it's highest among Black African women. It's highest among women who are cohabiting but are not married. And among men, it is highest among men again who are living with a partner but are not married to that partner, and also higher in urban compared to rural areas. Next slide. Here, we're looking at drivers. What are the drivers of gender-based violence? And here we're looking at physical and or sexual IPV. And what the data is telling us is that the number of partners, so the higher the number of partners a person has had, that increases your risk of having experienced GBV. It is also higher among those who use condoms, higher among frequent drinkers, so those that use alcohol, and data, there's a lot of data on substance use that links sexual GBV and also alcohol use or even drug use. Lastly, the part that I was talking about, mental health for both men. If you look at perpetration, you can see that these are men with high risk of clinical depression. And if you look at the other part, you can see that these are women who have a severe depression. So as you know, mental health can be there before or after. So it can also be an effect of having experienced GBV violence, gender-based violence. But what it is saying here is that we also need to deal with mental health. Next slide. These are drivers of HIV. Again, we see age higher among 35 to 49, higher among Black women and also Black men, lowest for individuals that have a tertiary education. We've always known that education protects women, but you also see for men in terms of perpetration that it's lowest in that group, higher among unemployed for women, and again, this living arrangement of cohabiting and not being married. So HIV is also higher in that group, and HIV is higher also in the rural and versus the urban area. Next slide. Those are the socio-demographic factors that are driving HIV. Please allow me to skip them. I will share the presentation. I'm just looking at my time, but you can see partners' age, current condom use, alcohol use, drug use, and also psychological distress. Next slide. Yeah, so if we look at the two, what are the common things? For women, it's race. So very high. GBV, HIV, high among Black women. Women who are living with a partner, not married, so relationship status matters. Condom use. And lastly, again, mental health, especially for men. Next slide. We also wanted to show you a little bit about the values or attitudes that helps us to understand why these two epidemics are intersecting. So we looked at controlling behavior, wanting to know if women had experienced, for an example, a partner who's ever refused to use a condom, or someone who gets angry when they are requesting a condom. And we found that 26% of women indicated that their partner gets angry when they use a condom, and the same amount of women indicated that a partner has ever refused a condom, or they get angry if they insist on using a condom. So that affects, obviously, the HIV prevention. Next slide. This slide is talking to data that came from men in terms of what is it that men believe. And what it is telling us is that there are values that are informing HIV infections, in that 44.4% of men indicated that when they request sex, they expect their partner to agree to that. They also would have a problem or be angry. 21.1% of men indicated that they would be angry if a woman or their partner requested a condom. Next slide. Here, I just wanted to point to the three, and I apologize. On the slide, the figures are there, but I can see that on the screen, it is not showing the percentage. So 48% of men indicated that men believed that men need more sex than women. So this is women, they held the same belief. But also when you look at men, they also had a large number of them also held the same belief. Issues of ownership. 6.4% of men think that if a man has paid lobola for his wife, she must have sex even if she doesn't want to. So these are values or attitudes, gendered power relations that are also driving GBV. Next slide. Okay. I'll only pick on one, which is talking to the rape culture. If you're looking there on top, the figures are back. So 9.9%, 10% of men think that if a woman a woman has to be blamed for putting themselves at risk or at a risk situation if they're raped. So those are disturbing beliefs that some men have. Almost 10%, actually 10% of men. 11%, or if you round it up, we talk about 11% of men think that if a woman doesn't fight physically back, that the woman is then, it is not rape. So you can see that these are the struggles that we have in terms of what we need to do to change behavior. I'm going to conclude because my time is up. Please move me to the next slide, Sean. In terms of the overall risk factors for two, number one is we saw sexual violence is a big one, power imbalance, economic dependency is also a big one. Next slide. Stigma and isolation, psychosocial impact is also a big one. I spoke about mental health, but also there is a common risk for both HIV and GBV among groups that are marginalized. And here we're talking about women with disabilities and LGBTQ plus members. What is it that we need to do? One, we need to integrate care. I think that's why I am here. I want to really, really motivate for that. We need to work towards early identification of trauma in HIV. We also need to integrate our research. We need to combine HIV and GBV. We need to look at gender equality and education and also legal protections. Next slide. And lastly, in terms of recommendations, we need to implement community-based interventions that are dealing with access, change gender norms, strengthen coordination, but also look at law enforcement as one important component of what we need to do. Our prevention for GBV and HIV need to be integrated and also factor in alcohol abuse, HIV prevention, but also economic empowerment of women. Use recent prevalence data for GBV and HIV to inform social policies that deal with vulnerability for the two groups. And finally, we need to ensure that we are using an intersectionality informed approach to be able to deal with HIV and GBV. Thank you.
I was actually thinking that with just this data alone, we can run a workshop of a whole week, because, and I'm so glad, isn't it that some of you in the room, I won't name you, don't you feel vindicated that data is actually justifying us for adopting certain positions that were not understood in the time, but now it's proving to be that we were actually correct. I won't unpack here because I know that you'll ask these questions, but a lot has come up. Issues of norms, issues of gendered power relations, issues of belief systems. And I'm so glad that in this country, again, there have been piloted programs that actually look at these kind of things. And we have seen the results that are exactly what Dr. Mpumi is giving us. So I'm happy. As I said again, this is the start of a great journey. I won't take too long, and I will ask again also that you please bear with us. We will be erring on the side of allowing our speakers to speak, because I think the data and the knowledge that they're giving us is key to inform our actions as we go forward. So we're not gonna take too much of your time, but please allow us that we allow them to actually talk to us. And next in line is actually speaking to one of the points that Dr. Mpumi raised, the issue of lack of access to legal access. And Ms. Karabo Aza is going to speak to us about the barriers of implementing the Sexual Offences Act to protect victims of statutory rape. As I said, South Africa excels when it comes to policies and frameworks, but we wonder, why is it that there is no since the implementation? And in order for us to understand why no implementation, we need to explore the barriers. And we have a very capable lady to speak to us on the topic, as she's the director of the Center for Child and lecturer in the Department of Private Law at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. The Center for Child Law is an organization that protects and promotes children's rights through research, advocacy, and strategic litigation. Karabo holds an LLB in a certificate in advanced labor law, and LLM in child law cum laude, and LLM in constitutional and administrative law, and certificate in environmental rights from the University of Pretoria. She serves on the advisory committee of the South Africa Law Reform Commission, Project 100D, on care and contact with children, incorporating family dispute resolutions. So we welcome you, Ms. Karabo. Please, the floor is yours. Technology. See, I always say those of, there she is. Go ahead, Karabo.
Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Sincere apologies. I seem to had a bit of a challenge with my connection. Apologies for that. So thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion. I really appreciate it. being mindful of time, I'm going to maybe pick up where the opening speaker mentioned the fact that South Africa has good policies, good laws that we have in relation to dealing with issues of gender-based violence, issues of sexual offenses. However, now and then we do find that our law is not comprehensively protective of children, and actually that can exacerbate some of the issues that the previous speaker before me touched on in relation to particularly adolescents being exposed to legal processes that harm them. So my topic that I'm focusing on today has to do with what we call consensual sexual activities. However, starting with the fact that in our Sexual Offences Act, we have provisions that say that when you are between 12 and 16, you can consent to sexual activity amongst that group as adolescents. However, if you're under 16, the law says that you cannot consent to sexual activity, and therefore if somebody who is 20 has a sexual relations with a person under the age of 16, that is a statutory offense. So one of the issues that piqued our concern a few years ago is that we were going through cases that come from a Supreme Court of Appeal and a High Court, as we do because we do a lot of litigation. And we picked up that there was an issue with Section 56(2) of the Sexual Offences Act. And before I delve into the particulars of that, it may be appropriate for me to just read it out for you so that you understand what it means. So remember, I just mentioned that the Sexual Offences Act says that if you're under 16, you cannot consent to sexual activity. But the Section 56(2) says that whenever an accused person is charged with an offense under Section 15 or 16 of that same act, which has to do with sexual activities, it is a valid defense to such a charge to contend that the child deceived the accused person into believing that he or she was 16 years or older at the time of the alleged commission of the offense, and that the accused reasonably believed that this child was 16 years or older. We've just seen the stats about the issues of power imbalances, and also the issues pertaining to the fact that how our system responds to violence may also mean that young people and women particularly become long life victims of violence. Now, this is defense I just read to you is in our legislation, and it actually means that if a 20-year-old man, a 22-year-old, 50-year-old man has sexual relations with a 15-year-old, and they are charged with an offense, they can say, well, I believe that she was over 16. And that belief has to do with things such as, and I need to read this out for you as well. They may say that the victim looked older. They may say that I found her next to a place where only adults hang out, for example, in our country, next to a tavern. They may say that the way the 15-year-old behaved or the way that they engaged with them led to them believing that they were not under the age of 16. Now, this resulted in cases where convictions of statutory rape were actually set aside. So people who had been convicted for having sexual relations with children, and the court had already found that on appeal, were successful by explaining to the court that no, I believe that she was over the age of 16. That being the case without them having done anything actively to determine the age of that child. And this is something that we, in our view, thought that it was very critical that we challenge it. We have a court case now pending before the High Court where we challenge this defense. And I think we can understand what kind of harms this kind of defense does, particularly to young women. It blames the victim. So if you're 15, somebody talked to you next to a tavern, they have sexual relations with you, they can claim that, because of that, they thought you were older. It also perpetuates stereotypes that are harmful in relation to children tempting adults, and particularly girl children. It also, again, talks to the issue of the power imbalances and dynamics, which have already been mentioned, pertaining to how women are more susceptible to getting HIV and being exposed to gender-based violence. And lastly, this defense is very outdated. So we actually undertook a research that traced this defense from colonial times, even in English law, as way back as the 1920s, where it was this provision was put in the laws to precisely protect older men when they had sexual relations with young girls who at that time were thought to not be girls who were chased or who were behaving in a particular way that is accepted by society. And I want to emphasize that this is not something that is academic. We traced recent cases, number of cases, where girls who had, went through a trial, testified about what happened to them, but later on, the perpetrators then their convictions were set aside, meaning that you sit with those girls without any recourse and without any belief that the justice system can actually assist them. What we've also found in relation to this in particular is that it goes against everything that has been found, for instance, in the recent Embrace judgment about consent. Because if you were to think about it, if a child by law is protected and is presumed not to have the age of consent, then you have somebody who's now given a special defense to say, well, but I was deceived and they never really established their consent. So when we started engaging with the Minister of Justice, I must disclose that they have been positive to some extent about the fact that they acknowledge that this kind of law creates problems and barriers for victims of sexual violence, which we know in our countries, it's a twin pandemic that is the GBV part of it and contributes then to the HIV issues, that you cannot have a defense such as this in the law because it continues to violate the rights of children. They have expressed that they are willing to engage in a process where we may find a solution by agreement that we can place before the court in order for this issue to then be addressed. One of the other issues that we are trying to also pick up with this issue of consensual ages of consent and sexual activity is that we've also realized that our young people are not and children are not being educated enough about these issues of consent and how to also protect themselves. So we also, in the context of trying to do the case, also thinking about advocacy strategies to also challenge these issues. So I want to conclude by saying that, yes, we have a lot of positive laws. We have actually gone a great deal in making sure that the laws are centered around the victims. But there is still a need to continue to scrutinize and to actually assess whether the law itself is not a barrier at many times. And maybe the last thing I should mention is that thinking also about when these children who are victims of sexual violence come before the courts. We undertook a study a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, about whether the courts also are responsive. Because if you go and read the judgments that I mentioned that led to us doing this new case, you will see that there is a concern about how the courts deal with victims of sexual violence. And we undertook a study because we have the specialized courts of sexual offenses court. We undertook a study to check with those courts and to test whether those courts are really child-friendly or child-centered. And what we found, it's a published report where some magistrates willingly participated in the study, indicated that they felt that they were not equipped to deal with matters where children are victims. They pointed out quite a number of gaps, pointed out the fact that they need extensive training on how to deal with child victims of sexual violence and rapes. So you can imagine that now when you have these special defenses, you have these procedural issues that create more barriers for children, and you have presiding officers that on their own account indicate that they require training, that we will not have justice for children who are victims of sexual offenses. So that is a continued work that when it comes to the response, particularly legal response, the response of the courts, which ideally one would want to actually have children come into contact with that system because it means they're victims. But unfortunately, when they do, we still have a lot of work to do in relation to making sure that the laws, the processes, and the people dealing with the children fully are invested and will ensure that practically children get the justice that they are entitled to. I think I'm going to end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Karabo. And this is a mouthful, actually. And as we actually knew that the law exists, yes, but there are loopholes, and the perpetrators know how to use those loopholes. And I'm glad that they are picking on the issue of advocacy, because we realize that even in areas where the law is available, people not knowing their rights or not accessing that information hinders actual implementation of the law. So I'm so glad, and we'll be watching and following very closely to hear the outcome of this case, which I think will determine a lot on the upcoming cases. And between me and your time to shine and ask questions is a last 10 minutes presentation on the GBVF NSP implementation, which was supposed to be given by Ms. Esther Maluleke, who is the director in the Department of Women, Youth and Person with Disability, but she's unavailable and replaced by Mandla. So if Mandla is online, Mandla, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Am I audible? All right. Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. Firstly, I must appreciate and thank the fund for inviting us as a department in this very important webinar. I have a presentation with me, and if Sean, you don't mind to flight my presentation, then I will be in a position to talk to it. Right. All right. Thank you again, colleagues. And once more, this is a presentation which we're going to look at the gender-based violence and femicide from the multi-sectoral coordination point of view, while we would also take account in terms of where we're at on the implementation of the NSP and what we start to see as kind of a developing trends in as far as implementing the NSP. So next slide. So this is just an outline in terms of this presentation, what is going to entail, where we look at the background as well as kind of share the context, which is linked to the progress which was made thus far, while we'll also zoom in and hone in into the theory of change, which is guard against with the NSP with regards to all the 6 pillars of the NSP. And we'll also share some of ideas in terms of if we wanted to implement the NSP, how can be the ground fertile in as far as the environment and the landscape in the country. And the last 2 ones one will look at some of the lessons that we learned as we are responsible and supporting the multi-sectoral coordination aspect and give some reflections which are linked also with what we've been seeing since we've been implementing the NSP and closing it with the closing remarks. Next slide. So in terms of this slide is really linked to Dr. Mpume's presentation on the survey, which is the prevalence, which is the first survey of its kind in South Africa, which we really appreciate. And I think it's also going to inform the way we implement the NSP. And with that being said, we noted that, and we've always been hearing from the president as in his State of Nation address, where he always emphasized that gender-based violence is a second pandemic in South Africa, which really needs concerted effort, while we're trying by all means to ensure that the progress has been made through the work that we've been doing, but seemingly the gender-based violence manifests itself in different forms, as has been mentioned from the other side, particular issues of femicide, looking at the issues around child abuse, as well as economic abuse. And I think also it was mentioned earlier around the mental health, which is also one of some of the realities that we happened to experience. And I think the other aspects that we're starting to see, which is a developing trend and is quite concerning, is centered around the workplace harassment, which really makes, and us see that workplace tends to be toxic, environment in greater regard. So this is just kind of give you a better sense and the picture in terms of where we're at and how this gender-based violence manifests itself, and linking it to HIV, while we also note, there are some of the interlinkages which also been discussed in greater regard in as far as the substance abuse and gender inequalities, poverty, and unemployment. Next slide. I must say the three or two slides really gives a context, and this is exactly linked to what Dr. Mpumi already presented. And I think due to time, I'm not going to look at this slide in greater details because Dr. Mpumi, as they are also custodian and also the colleagues that supported with the study, we felt that we also need to share some of the findings that we picked up in the report, which is the prevalence survey. So if you can move Simon into the next slide. I think this slide is quite important, which I would want to touch base and in complementing what Dr. Mpumi said. One of the things which might not be surprising is how high the proportion of violence directed to women with disabilities, which is also something that came very strongly in the study, and which I feel I also would love to share as it was not added in the slide. Please, next slide. So colleagues, I'm sorry, I don't know what is going on with my slides from your end. The seemingly kind of during the uploading it looks like it's a bit of kind of problematic. But I think, this is gives us a snapshot of the progress which we've made over the past 30 years. And I think we kind of break it into three. We acknowledge and we know that we have good legislations that were recently even passed in South Africa, while that also we also noted the policies that seems to be gender responsive in the country. We also mindful and also note and appreciated the significant progress that has been made, particularly looking at women representation in as far as political leadership. This is also, some of the efforts in bringing women into the forth, in as far as mainstreaming the issue of gender responsive. The other aspects that we've noted and we wanted to highlight here, it's also around women representative in the public sector, which also linked to the leadership. But at the same time, we still note that we are still experiencing the unequal distribution of land, particularly focusing on women, which is a worry. And while we also note that the uptake in tertiary institutions is quite big for women representative, while we noted that the science, engineering, and technology is the one that we see a low uptake of women being interested to get into that field, which is some of the issues that we noted. And lastly, in terms of what we also observed, that there is not much progress that we've made thus far in as far as unpaid care work. And this is also linked to some of the work that we're going to embark on in relations to G20, as we are also part of the technical working group looking at women issues. And the aspect that we've seen as a challenge, which still persists, is the gender-based violence, particularly looking at teenage pregnancy, sexual harassment, which I already mentioned, and the rape, to be precise, and the linkages of gender-based violence and HIV. And we also noted that the climate impact around food security, which also something that came strongly in the study that was shared, and we also understand and know some of the recent incidents and or occurrences that we saw in South Africa, particularly in KZN, around issues of floods. Next slide. This slide really, brings us home as how we would want and how we've been implementing the NSP, which is framed within the 6 pillars. But I think the most important aspects around the 6 pillars is always led through the issue around accountability, responsiveness, and prevention. And I think, there is always an intention of us by all means to stop gender-based violence before it happens. And I think this is also one of the most important aspects in the work that we need to do as government, as civil society, as private sector, that our concerted effort needs to be centered around prevention, so that we don't happen to spend more resources and more money on the response side, which is around justice, which is also around care and support and healing. So this is just, to echo the sentiments of if we wanted to end gender-based violence in our lifetime, if we need to implement these pillars as how it's been framed. Next slide. In terms of how, as I indicated earlier, how we would want to see a ground being fertile in implementing the NSP. These are some of the aspects that we noted, and we kind of categorize it in these different categories. One, it looks at the political leadership, which we know and we saw that if there is no will politically, the issues of gender-based violence and femicide and HIV will tend to shy away and will tend not to prioritize. And there needs to be that kind of an accountability frameworks that are put in place, and also the oversight from the political part of it, where politicians and politically champion the agenda of gender-based violence and femicide. At the same time, from the government agencies and independent bodies, which oftentimes would be statutory bodies in South Africa, the issue of allocating resources and providing funding to implement the NSP across all the 6 pillars is quite important and needs to be looked at. And we also need to ensure that there is an alignment in terms of prioritizing the aspects of gender-based violence, particularly looking at the indicators and how we would want to end gender-based violence before it happened. And this is also in line with integrating the monitoring and evaluation systems within the existing strategic frameworks, which we know that we don't say gender-based violence needs to be in a bubble. It needs to augment and support the already existing structures. While from the civil society point of view, I think the work and the space for civil society in terms of promoting the NSP is quite critical, and while ensuring that also there is an alignment in terms of implementing, while advocating the issues of addressing GBV. And in terms of our development partners, I think it's centered around the agenda that partners needs to support the work of the NSP and see the priorities of NSP being implemented. This is really also to provide advocacy strategy advice, at the same time providing technical support. We also understand and know that there are prominent development partners that are in that space of technical support, apart from the funding element. So this is also some of the proposal and also some of the things that we believe that if you wanted to implement the NSP needs to be thought through. Private sector, I think it's always about the issue of funding. Is also around advisory at the same time, and creating valuable partnership between government and private sector, forming PPPs, particularly looking at, the essence of how to best implement. While we always need to look at from the private sector, the inward looking and the outward looking, and ensuring that private sector also have programs that deals with gender-based violence, not only to say that there is a sexual harassment policy, which is not implemented. Next slide. So the conversation for today, as a department, we felt strongly it ties in and links to pillar one, which is around accountability, coordination, and leadership. So this is some of the high-level progress that we've made at this juncture as a department, where we established the IMC, which is extended now. As when we started, we had 6 ministries. Now we have 10 ministries. We also have been supporting and be part of the enactment of the National Council on GBV, which is the Act, and which was recently proclaimed late last year. The work that is currently underway is centered around the state of readiness of the council, while we are in conversation and engaging with the National Treasury around the funding aspects. So one of the some of the other aspects and the work that we've done as a department, we foster and make sure that gender-based violence and femicide in as far as the implementation of the NSP is a standing item in FOSAT, which is the meeting of the DGs every time where there's that sitting, NSP is in the agenda. We also worked, and from the department side, supporting the voluntary platform, which is called GBVF Collective, which is also a multi-sector by its nature, and it's a thinking tank to implement the NSP. And that's also the work that we've done and we are doing, including such platform that is Work Corner, which focus on women economy, as well as work very closely with faith-based sector in as far as implementing the NSP. And there is series of other work that we're doing at the provincial level, as we don't have footprints as a department, but we work very closely with Office of the Premiers, and we are supporting the program that has been funded through EU, where we have technical monitors and data capturers that is based in the Office of the Premier in ensuring that the implementation of the NSP takes place at the provincial level, as well as at the district, particularly looking at the aspect of localizing and popularizing the NSP in the various provinces. We appreciative, and I think that's also the reason that we are here, the fact that they was established the response fund, and that made us to be where we're at, and it's also supporting the grants through the community-based organizations. Next slide. So the three slides are really centered around the experiences that we gained thus far in as much as implementing the NSP, particularly looking at the multi-sectoral coordination aspect. So we kind of break this into 4 thematic areas. One is the political championship, which we centered around how President has been very vocal and ensures that there are various summits that have been taking place, that we have a approved NSP by cabinet, which also linked to the act which I mentioned earlier, that there is a funded ERAP, which was also the program that we had previously. And as I mentioned earlier, in all SONAs, that President always sets the priority of implementing the NSP, which is quite important. While from the civil society championing, we know that one of the beauties about the NSP, which I always in all the spaces which I talked about the NSP, that there is always that sense of ownership of the NSP by civil society as they are also have been the core crafters of the NSP and also been very instrumental in as far as the implementation and also making sure that this also is linked to what has been presented earlier, where 2018 women of South Africa marched in Union Building and demanded that South Africa must have the NSP. Next slide. I'm aware of time. I would really move with speed. With this slide, I already kind of linked it with political championship around the fact that government needs to be on the forefront in terms of implementing, and our consultative effort needs to be reiterative in the sense that priorities of the NSP find its expression to the DDM, find its expression to the plans of government, so that NSP is implemented holistically. Next slide. So in terms of the development partners and championing, I already mentioned that we've always been grateful with UN Women and Canadian agency supporting us to start the NGBVF collective, which is, I already mentioned, as a platform. And this is really stemmed from the fact that we felt very strongly that we cannot have an NSP while actually we are waiting for the council. There must be a work that needs to be done. And this is really some of, the pockets that we've seen that has been done through the development partners in as far as implementing and supporting from the multi-sectoral, which at this juncture makes it plus minus about 500 participants or members of this voluntary platform, which is really centered around government, civil society, and private citizen, which would not belong to any organization, but they would want to see the implementation of the NSP. And the last aspect here is centered on the private sector championship, which I already mentioned, the response fund, which is established and is functional. And I guess, again, that's why we are here. And also some of the work that has been on the rectification and domestication of the ILOC 190. And this is also the space that we supported, and we've been working through private sector championing. And this lastly include the Work Corner, which is a multi-sectoral by its nature, and want to see women do more than catering, but being in a space where you'll find main dominance in as far as tenders, which are multi-billion tenders. This also the agenda that has been driven through Work Corner. Next slide. So this is a reflection and also noting the lessons that we learned as we are halfway through in the implementation of the NSP. We noted and we see that high levels and the cohesive leadership matters. And I think I already mentioned it earlier, that, if there's no leadership behind the implementation, things easily fall through the cracks and there will be no accountability, which is also linked to the second aspect. And this is really around understanding that institutionalization takes time and requires a repetitive effort, iterable efforts that we should not get tired to ensure that departments embed the NSP, departments prioritize the NSP. So this is kind of a cycle that, over and again, that we ensure that, we go to various departments and assess their APPs, assess their strategic plan, as well as DDM, in ensuring that they institutionalize the NSP. And the last aspect, this is around co-creation, which is linked to whole society approach. And this is also the beauty of the work and the experience that we gained thus far, that, we noted that NSP is for all of us. It's not for government. It's not for private sector. It's not for civil society. It's for all of us, and which we have one intention and one reason that we want to see gender-based violence being eradicated in our lifetime. So that's also the beauty about the NSP. Instead of pointing fingers, that we all need to take equal ownership, while we need to be implemented as the entire spheres. With that being said, we understand that coordination can be a very complex exercise. This is also linked to some of the complexities we've noted, which is also linked to one of the very first slides, which I mentioned around issues of teenage pregnancy, substance abuse, HIV, poverty, etc., etc. Next slide. With this slide, I think there's two aspects that we want to leave this conversation on. I think one is to acknowledge the challenges that this process takes time, and we need funding to implement, particularly from the coordination point of view. And we also noted that there are gaps between the work that we do in as far as the NSP and linking it to the HIV, but we are aware that as we are halfway through, there is an external evaluation that should be in a position to assist us to really bring these two together through work that we always been partnering with SANEC. So that is quite critical, and this is also linked to the way forward that we wanted to make sure that the establishment of the council is fast-tracked, where there is serious and various work streams in as far as ensuring that NSP has been implemented across. I already mentioned the work that we need to embark and be intentional of in as far as the work with the South African National AIDS Council at the local level. Last slide.
Thank you, Mandla. I think we can't go any further, but I think we really got a lot from your presentation. Thank you very, very much. And I'm glad we actually waited to see the way forward, because I think the way forward actually carries a lot that we can use. We recognize, colleagues, that we can't really do justice to these issues in 10 minutes presentation. Yeah, honestly speaking, each theme deserves at least 2 hours of unpacking. But he did very well, Mandla, in highlighting the NSP for us and also giving us where they are in terms of implementation. The one thing that I want us to actually think about as we go forward is there is a lot that is being done top down. What are we doing bottom up in order to complement that? The issues of accountability she's talking about, the complexities that he put there, you saw them. And I mean, to be honest, they are all very real. They could benefit very much from a bottom-up approach. So I'm not going to hold the mic any longer. Now you have exactly 10 minutes. That one I'm going to monitor to ask questions. There were four speakers, maybe three technical speakers, and welcome from Ms. Zanele. If you have questions, please, very succinct, very short question, probably per speaker, if you can. And if you possible, highlight to which speaker or which topic you want to ask your question about. Okay, show of hands. One Nozuko. I see one second row, and then towards the end, I acknowledge the three. Maybe we stop it at that. Yeah.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the informative presentation. Yes. Actually, I've got a vested interest in the Sexual Offences Act.
Okay.
As it was highlighted by Ms. Lerato.
Yes.
That section 52 is actually worrying me. And it's not only worrying me from a justice justice point of view, is also worrying me when it comes to traditional courts at community level. So as much as University of Pretoria is doing as much as it can to identify all these gaps that are in existence, and that even the law enforcement agencies and the fact that the capacity is very low when it comes to this, to dealing with statutory rape issues. What are we actually doing when it comes to the traditional courts?
Great. Thank you
At
very
community
much.
level.
Thank you very much. I hope we still, Ms. Karabo is still with us for that question, but let's take all the questions and then we'll see at the end. Number 2. If you can, maybe just your name.
Nature.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Nature. My question is to the last speaker,
Okay.
pertaining the NSP implementation.
Okay.
I'm quite interested with the number of teams. He did slide where he mentioned that they have 36 teams across the 6 provinces in the country. And I'm quite interested in why the 6 provinces, in terms of looking at the response, since we have 9 provinces,
Okay.
in terms of the directive to that. That would be helpful.
Thank you very much. And the last question. Oops, it's not on.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Masego. I'm a GBV activist. I would like to appreciate all the presentation that you've done this morning. But I think my issue is on access to criminal justice system, because I feel we have a lot of laws that we have in our country. Now we have an NSP that seeks to address GBV and the linkages between HIV and GBV, but we still have a concern in terms of accountability, because that's the biggest gap that we have in our communities on the ground. They can't access justice, criminal justice system, because of the behavior and attitudes that they experience when they are trying to access that. And we are losing a lot of cases because people are losing hope in the justice system because of their previous experiences, or because of the cases that they follow in the media and the cases they follow in the courts that are not going through, and the recourse is not there. So my concern is that we have all these laws, we have beautiful laws, but how are people accessing them? And the issue of accountability, but most important of education and prevention. How are we going to curb gender-based violence if people don't on the ground, they don't know NSP? If people on the ground, they don't know what is Domestic Violence Act. When they get to the courts, they're still exposed to attitudes and behaviors that are not well towards them. And people turn back because of the attitudes and behaviors of the service providers. I'm worried about how people are accessing our police stations. Are they safe enough, as we are saying, on the books, on the researches and all that? People on the ground attest to that they are safe enough. Are people able to go and open cases and obtain protection orders? My worry is accountability. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So it seems like we have 2 questions for Ms. Karabo and 1 for Mandla. And I wouldn't, is there a last one? I can't see. Oh, yes. Okay, the very last shot. I think I'll take only for, there are other sessions of question and answer. Maybe you will move you to the, yeah. And I'm so sorry that I'm actually excluding a man. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Nogulunga. I'm a private sector-based clinician.
Yes.
I'm based in the community. And I think I want to echo what the last lady asked from a community perspective. And also, you know, Mandla spoke about the collaborating with the private sector.
Yes.
For example, I found the invite to this meeting on LinkedIn. Private sector people or clinicians or community-based practitioners that are the gateway into the health sector or into, you know, community structures where gender-based violence gets dealt with. We don't have avenues to engage with the department. Maybe start by mapping private sector or mapping community-based private practitioners, even clinicians. I'm a clinician. We don't have access to, you know, channels where we link our patients. And trust me, we see a lot from a community-based perspective.
That's true. Thank you very much. Again, vindicating my position that the bottom-up approach is really needed. And this, before I pass on to Karabo, the question you asked on access to justice. We've seen programs on the community when they are empowered who actually make sure that victims have access to justice. But also there is victimization, we know that, and there is also corruption, we know that. But how do we ensure that actually that safety to access to justice is available? So Karabo, please take it.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'll try to be quick. So I do agree with the question around the traditional courts. And I think people will recall that when the traditional courts bill was going through Parliament, there were provisions also that relate to how matters of sexual violence and GBV must be dealt with by those courts. From our side, we did make submissions about how we are of the view that sexual offences cases and cases of ubutwala where children are concerned should not be matters that can be mediated, because that's what the bill was proposing. So trying to find a solution amongst the parties, because that then does not mean justice for the child who's concerned. Certainly, there are a lot of systemic issues. Give you an example. There was a widely reported story of how there's a magistrate in KwaZulu-Natal who was doing mediation and making parties settle cases of sexual violation of children. So the systemic problems are on so many levels. I think, ideally, as I said, we should be investing a lot in prevention and making sure that it's everybody's business to make sure that children are not violated, even their own families. And then where there is a violation, the response of the system, when we went and talked to the magistrates and we said, but there's a problem with how you handle cases, they said, well, by the time the cases get to us, the police have failed, the prosecutions has not done their work properly. So you can see already that we have these continuous systemic issues, and unless we invest in them, as part of going with the other strategies, unless we question how people are trained, how they respond to these issues, that then leads to that last point that was made, that then you find people not coming to the system. We know that our conviction rates are low. We also know that there are many cases that are not reported. But even for those who then report, the system needs to be greatly improved to protect rights of women and rights of children as a whole, and all victims, let me put it that way. So certainly, with some provisions and the traditional courts, we need to also start looking at that. People who are working with those courts in the communities need to observe and see if there are any issues pertaining to how those courts are maybe not dealing with GBV and children's issues in a way that is in line with the constitution, that is protective. And then we need to then take steps to certainly engage. On our side, we do always try and challenge the laws, but then also, as we said, trying to invest also in a lot of advocacy and educative approaches for our communities, because as it's been said now, we must watch out for this top down. And the problem with the law is that even if you fix it and you don't educate the communities, they still think the law is a barrier, and their experience of the response by the justice system, if it's not helpful to them, then it means nothing. I hope I've answered the questions that were posed to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was actually well answered. I was also thinking there used to be initiative, I think, remind me, Doctor and Nozuko, there used to be initiative with SANAC and UNDP of advocacy with the judges that were seeking to inform and educate on how to actually deal with sensitive matters such as this. I think those need to be revived as well, because oftentimes I agree with you, Karabo, issues of advocacy, issues of education, you'll be surprised that sometimes you think somebody knows their thing, but because of the complexities that Mandla showed us, then certain things elude them. So I think educating everyone who is involved is key. On the question of being involved by the community clinician, I think this is already a very good start that the fund has showed us on calling this kind of conversation. Maybe to continue discussing not only with the department, but also with the fund, and soon, hopefully, with the council, on how to involve the communities and community-based practitioners in the response. And Mandla, over to you on the question on why 6 provinces instead of 9.
All right. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be very succinct as I took longer in my presentation, so I got maybe carried away. My humble apologies. So in terms of that, numbers which I shared is the work that we've done as the department. There is a greater work that is been done at the provincial level by the technical monitors and data capturers, which I mentioned, in terms of establishing their rapid response teams. So the one that we highlighted in the presentation was the work that as a department we supported. But over and above that, there is in all the provinces except Free State at this juncture in terms of having the technical monitors, but there is work in terms of establishing the rapid response team. And I must share just quickly, Chair, with your permission, that what are these rapid response team and what they mean. And they are multi-sectoral by its nature and comprises of civil society organization, government department to unlock and to rapidly respond to gender-based violence cases on the ground so that people, they can be in a position to be assisted in an agility point of view, particular accessing services. So that is the work that we're doing, and all of this, they kind of also takes time. And we need also not to establish for the sake of establishing a kind of a tick box exercise, because this work needs to go beyond that. So that is the number that you see, which links to the 36. But nevertheless, there's beyond that. I know, for example, I was in Mpumalanga last week, and one of the presentation that was done by the province, they even went to an extent to confirm that in all the districts in Mpumalanga, the rapid response teams, they've been established.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manda. That's very explicit. I hope you're happy with that answer. And I think maybe as a way forward, we'll put in a recommendation on how you can get connected to the rapid response team. And I know these rapid response teams, some of them are doing a great work. I know that there was that 100-day challenge that they were doing where they're actually challenging themselves to move fast. So I'm eating into my colleagues' time. I want to call Tato Farirai from SANAC, who's going to facilitate the panel. We have gone a little over time, but we had asked for your indulgence. Over to you, Tato.
Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. And good morning. Yes, it's still morning. And good morning to the colleagues in the room, and as well as those who are joining us online. CEO, I'm a bit shaken because I thought whenever I say the NSP, I'm talking about the NSP. And you can imagine if I work for the South African National AIDS Council and I'm confused what everybody else within the community is, how they're feeling. And I think that on its own, colleagues, indicates the silos and how we're working. So once again, my name is Tato Farirai. I'm from the South African National AIDS Council. I'm responsible for HIV prevention. So I'm the technical lead on HIV prevention. HIV prevention on the implementation of the National Strategic Plan on HIV, TB, and STIs. So you see, we have two NSPs. So when I say NSP, I'm thinking of the HIV, TB, and STI, not the other one. But we actually need to think of a way of ensuring that we combine these two. Let me also acknowledge the previous speakers, the presenters, on really laying out the groundwork and clearly articulating the intersectionality between HIV and GBV. Without wasting time, I would like a confirmation that I have my panelists. My panelists, they are all online. The first panelist that I would like to introduce is Dr. Shahida Omar from the Teddy Bear Clinic. Can I get a sign that Dr. Shahida is online. Can I get confirmation, please? Thank you. And the second one is Mandisa Dlamini from the Gugu Dlamini Foundation. Do we have Mandisa online as well? And the last panelist is Ms. Phumzile Ndlovu from Bridging the Gap, South Africa. Now, those are the three panelists. Yes, I see I have them. Welcome and thank you very much for really agreeing to participate on this very important, I think, conversation. Now, we've heard from the previous speakers who laid out the groundwork and really briefed us on the intersectionality. But now we want to hear from those on the ground. We want to hear from people who are now implementing and providing services at a community level in our communities. And I have questions that have been prepared for my panelists. I have 3 questions. I wonder if I'll still be able to go through 3 questions for the panel member, and I'll give them 2 minutes each per question. So the first round, I'll go through the first question and then we'll go like that three times. With the first round of questions, I would also like to request you to introduce yourselves. So, Dr. Shahida, before you even go on with responding to any of the questions, please introduce yourself.
Afternoon to everybody. Well, it's morning still.
It's still morning.
Shada Omar from the Teddy Bear Foundation for Abused Children. I'm the director of the organization. I think because of time constraints, if we can jump into the first question, Chair.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So with the work that you are doing with the Teddy Bear Clinic, what are some of the most pressing gaps in the support systems for children who have survived abuse? And particularly, we want to know in the relation to their heightened risk of adverse health outcomes, such as HIV.
Thank you, Chair, for that. I think very important question. Firstly, looking at the lack of integrated services, and I think that's something that we are all experiencing on the ground, where many child protection services and healthcare systems are working in silos. And it's making it difficult to address the intersecting issues of gender-based violence and HIV comprehensively. I hear an echo, I'm not sure why. The survivors of abuse, particularly sexual abuse, are at a higher rate and risk of contracting HIV, and there's often insufficient collaboration between child protection services and healthcare providers. And I think this is something that is really, really needing urgent attention. Secondly, the inadequate trauma-informed care, where children who have experienced abuse often face not only psychological, emotional, and physical trauma. These healthcare providers actually do not have adequate training in trauma-informed care, and child protection services may not always prioritize mental health as a part of a survivor-centered approach. And children may be less likely to engage in HIV prevention or treatment services without proper mental health care. And I think that's something very, very concerning. The stigma and discrimination, where we find survivors of abuse, particularly in communities where sexual violence is taboo, may face stigma when accessing services related to HIV. And of course, this results in seeking and delayed help or care, the fear of being ostracized, the fear of being labeled, and a reluctance to disclose their abuse or health status. And then inaccessible and overburdened services. We know in many low-resource settings, the availability and accessibility of both child protection and healthcare services are limited. They are few and far between, particularly in the disadvantaged and rural communities where they have to commute distances where they have to decide, are they going to buy a loaf of bread or do they need to go for self-actualization in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, providing therapy and support and healing. I think that's something also very, very critical. Then the lack of specialized support for children. Here we find that existing support services may not be tailored specifically to the needs of children, and we're referring specifically to HIV care and GBV services. This gap can prevent children from receiving age-appropriate adequate care, protection, and emotional support they need to recover and thrive. And these are some of the most important gaps that have been identified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think just to remind everyone that when we talk about children who are experiencing abuse, we said 58%, we heard from from HSRC that 58% of people who experienced gender-based violence experienced abuse before the age of 15. So this is significant. We do need to pay attention and close these gaps. Mandisa. Is she online? Okay. Okay, all right. Okay, let me proceed to Phumzile. And Phumzile, please remember to just introduce yourself and your organization in full. But the question I have for you is, so cultural and religious norms can sometimes be both protective and harmful when addressing gender-based violence and HIV. How can faith-based and traditional leaders be engaged to promote gender equality and survivor-centered responses?
Thank you, Tato. Good day, colleagues. My name is Phumzile Ndlovu. I am the Director for Bridging the Gap, and I'm also the UN Convener for Traditional Leaders and Religious Leaders in South Africa. Just to respond on your question, in terms of how the faith leaders and traditional leaders can be engaged to promote gender equality that is survivor-centered. We know that churches are considered as a safe space where people are seeking refuge when they are vulnerable and when they've been victimized. But to find that the same churches that were considered a safe space when religious leaders are not capacitated, they can be perpetual in promoting vulnerability and victimization through secondary victimization. I'm echoing. And also, we know that even people in rural communities in particular, they are still considering that the Constitution and human rights only applied for government workers. And their constitution is a religion and also and culture. So you find that 30 years in democracy, we are still battling with a lack of implementation of human rights and constitutional rights, because the individual, when it comes to accountability, we are still lacking the individual accountability in relation to the Constitution, the Bible of the country. Hence, our institutions such as churches and traditional courts, when they are not empowered, they still perpetuate violence and the progression of the disease. You'd find that in rural areas in particular, when a woman is forced to have sexual intimacy with her husband, even if her husband has got other multiple partners and doesn't use a condom. Ilobolo is used that it permits them to do whatever that they want to do on a woman. So for a woman who is being raped by an intimate partner, because of ilobolo, that is their constitution. So you find that there is a progression of this systematic of sexual exploitation of women and children that is rooted in our religious and traditional institution, and that leads to a culture of fear and shame and secrecy. And often the survivors are stirred by fear of their abusers, because their abusers are right there in their churches, are right there in their communities. So what we have done as Bridging the Gap is to work with the traditional courts. And I'm so grateful for our National Strategic Plan for HAST 2023 to 2028 and the Global Alliance for Children. I just want to salute those strategies, because when it comes to localization of the NSP, SANAC has done incredible work in the communities, but the only gap is that is localizing now from the ward to the village where the traditional courts are located. So in 2022, we started Isigodi approach, working with the traditional leaders on the ground so that they mobilize their communities. As you know, that the traditional leaders are there on the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. They are being recognized in terms of their roles and responsibility and their customary law. So they have a fundamental role that they are playing. So what we have done is to develop a code of conducts, taking from the current act that recently came for the traditional court, looking at the code of conduct of traditional leaders protecting women and girls in the community. We are piloting that in Ugu district. And also the United Nations Population Fund has been enhancing Isigodi model or Isigodi approach in KZN, targeting uThukela or Kahlamba, the municipality that have been practicing early child marriages or ukuthwala. So what is very important is that we need to revitalize traditional structures. And don't keep on starting now. It's a ward committee. It's these councils that are not going down where the population is. So you find that in each Isigodi, in a traditional court. Thank you.
My apologies for cutting you short. I think you've already gone into actually my second question, but also we are really running out of time. But you know, with the responses that we've just received from both Dr. Shahida and Phumzile, there's a common thread. There's a common thread around inadequate training across the board. There's a common thread I'm also seeing on secondary victimization, issues of mental health, and I think we need to, moving forward, be thinking of what else should we be doing to strengthen our response and ensure that we close those gaps. Dr. Shahida, my second question, and I'm going to combine it with the third one because we really are out of time. And we just want to hear about your experiences. Given your experiences at Teddy Bear Clinic, what are some of the best practices, if you can share one or two best practices that you have had in supporting child survivors of abuse, and that can be replicated at a national level?
Thank you, Program Director. So I think the best practice model, I would say promising interventions, is that we have adopted a holistic victim-centered approach. I think that's important to understand. We have an integrated care model where there's a multidisciplinary team that includes child protection workers, healthcare providers, mental health professionals, social workers, and psychologists, and legal experts. So we provide medical legal support, medical examinations, forensic medical examinations, and then legal support is the court preparation for cases that are going to court, criminal cases that have been opened, and that when the victim will have to testify, we take them through the whole court preparation process to allay and alleviate fears and anxieties, not to coach them on what to say, but to say it as it happened to prevent any contamination. I think the other thing is that we also have trained facilitators, therapists, counselors, volunteers on trauma-informed care, where we have healthcare and child protection service workers that recognize the signs of abuse, understand the links between gender-based violence and HIV, and obviously prioritize the child's safety, ensuring that they maintain dignity and emotional well-being, promoting the best interests of the child at all times, and that the services are non-judgmental and culturally sensitive to prevent secondary trauma. Another practice that we use is the referral systems, the referral pathways, where we have established clear and efficient referral pathways with multiple stakeholders, role players between child protection services and healthcare, broader healthcare, both physical and mental health services, that children who are victims are quickly and timelessly responded to in relation to HIV prevention, testing, and treatment of these services. Of course, it requires coordination, collaboration with and partnership with community-based organizers, legal entities, and other service providers to ensure that comprehensive care is provided. All our services are child-friendly, user-friendly. We have lots of, teddy bears that when each child that comes into the office leaves with a teddy bear, which is actually a transactional object, but also has methods in the madness that it reduces the cortisol levels, the stress hormones. By stroking a furry object, it alleviates those fears and anxieties. So I think that's important. We also do a lot of awareness raising, conscientizing outside of the clinic setting, going into the communities at local level, at grassroots level, within all communities, whether it's disadvantaged hotspot areas and your more affluent areas as well. And we provide legal protection and advocacy, so advocating for the rights of children on a macro level. I think this is important as we follow an ecological framework, micro, meso, and macro level. And I think my learned colleague Korabo spoke about sections 15 and 16 with the Center for Child Law. Teddy Bear Foundation was instrumental in the decriminalization of sexual offenses for children. And then, of course, there are other pieces of legislation where we've had a huge and integral role to play, and we provide long-term care. Thank you. I think this is basically looking at the risk of long-term health care and social consequences such as HIV. Thank you.
Thank you very much for articulating those best practices and the need to see the human being and then organize ourselves to provide services around the survivor. And the last question, I think, would go to Ms. Pumzile. So given the harmful practices that we have heard that contribute to both GBV and HIV, what strategies can be used to challenge and reshape these norms while maintaining respect for cultural identities?
Thank you, Karabo. the strategies that we can use is to contextualize our responses, our interventions, by revitalizing the traditional structures. We are not starting something that is not existing. These structures are not voted for. They've been existing for decades and centuries. So when we want to see an authentic community-led, we need to look at bottom-up approach, as Jacqueline has alluded. The social accountability will start by acknowledging the indigenous structures. And these are documented. We have shared best practices with the African Union in Ethiopia in preparation for the presidential summit. It's written on paper. The United Nations Population Fund have localized the International Commitment for Development, the ICPD, on the ground by bringing traditional leaders for dialogue. So now in action, what we can do in terms of revitalization, we have in KZN what we call onomehlo, the virginity testers. The virginity testers, they are assisting with the voluntary process of grooming young girls to focus on their education. They are not only focusing on hymen. So we can revitalize those structures so that we look at age of consenting and referral pathway as also sexual reproductive health education and mental health and digital screening education by onomehlo and families. And also we know that culture has promoted these manhood and masculinity. So we can incorporate mental health for boys and by embracing coaching and mentorship, because these young boys, they take ubusoga as a rite of passage. So if we worked with the indigenous structures, unomehlo and amagonzo, they can assist. And also the capacitation of traditional leadership with legal knowledge. I'm requesting that these interdepartmental, they need to come together. Justice must go on the ground. The prosecutors, we already tested at Kwanongoma and Opongolo, where the prosecutor go to the traditional court and work with the prosecutor of a traditional court. So the policy and the implementation requires interdepartmental coordination. So I think that's it for now. But also I'm requesting that you acknowledge Isigodi approach, because it's an evidence-based model that has been documented and that is currently piloted by UNFPA and AIDS Foundation. So it's depending on us to sustain it. And those are the best practices on the ground working with the traditional courts.
Thank you very much for that. I think, I'm sure we're all challenged because we also know that we live in a very patriarchal society. And some of these issues emanate from this patriarchy. And we really need to find a way of changing some of these issues and cultural practices, because culture is dynamic. We cannot be suffering and dying under this big umbrella of culture. Culture is dynamic, and culture should not be harmful to its members, to the community. Thank you very much to my panelists, but please remain online. I'm just going to have 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, and just take 2 questions from the floor. If there are any questions that one would like to pose, I have one hand here. I want to see if we have another one. We have another hand. If we can give the mic to the gentleman here, please. Can we start here, please? Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Christo Morolong. I'm an activist. I'm not sure. I had two questions for the previous speakers. I'm not sure if they're online. But I think it's best that we started with the Sasol. I was just observing, and we started with the Sasol video. I'm not sure by default or by this. Empowerment, and I know that goes with against traditions and norms and whatever. How do we empower women, to be able to be self-sufficient, financially, whatever? Because I know that's one of the key, things when there's gender, especially now with our democracy, women being empowered, getting more salaries or having the same salary like a man, which traditionally was not. The man was the provider and, everything. And it causes uneasiness with men now. And I mean, they might want to weaponize that. So what initiative are we having so that women are empowered, financially and so? And I think for Lerato, the question that I had, in terms of the law and sorry, that's my last question. The law and social media, there's now the prevalence of where, somebody will just, wherever they have, they've got a good time and, just release a sex video, in terms of the law and social media. How is the victim, mostly normally it will be the woman who will be affected? How does the law apply and protect women most in those areas? Thanks.
Thank you. Our second speaker over there, good question.
Hi again. I just wanted to find out from, I think it's Ms. Pumzile, in terms of the virginity testing, what are the mechanisms that are put in place to make sure that all the virginity testing, the girls agree to that? Because for me personally, I feel it's sexual exploitation. I feel it's a harmful practice for a child to be there and just to be undressed and be looked at in that manner. I feel like sometimes we expose our girls to unsafe practices, even though it's our culture. But I'm just concerned about the safety mechanisms that are put in place to make sure that these girls are protected. And most importantly, their consent is valued. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have three questions. The first one, don't worry, I'm going to protect you because I think even from your background, you're into finances. But I think on the floor, we have people who would be able to respond to the first question. And then, of course, the second question, I'm not sure if the previous panelists or presenters are still with us, and then if they would be able to respond. And the last question, then it's going to Ms. Pumzile. So let's start with, not in the room, let's start with, I think, online, with this last question on virginity testing. Ms. Pumzile.
Thank you, Tato. I think, first of all, we need to separate harmful practices and the indigenous rites of passage and the framing of human rights within the African context. So when it comes to virginity testing, this is a rite of passage that is indigenously practiced. It's not a harmful practice. So this is a voluntary process which creates an affirmation. It is done to groom young girls to focus on education. So what we have done in Ugu district is to create informed consent and recruitment forms. So the informed consent is done between the family and the child, that is encouraged by the family members to attend virginity testing. The children are not forced. So, and what we are doing right now, we have increased the curriculum because there was no indigenous curriculum in South Africa. Yet when you go to countries like Kenya, and Nigeria, Ethiopia, they are localizing, they are contextualizing their strategies and policies in their own language. So what we have done is to take sexual reproductive health strategies and gender-based violence, HIV testing linkages, and incorporated on this curriculum for virginity testing. We have even incorporated cyberbullying, because you find that the same children who are virgins, their parents are buying them gadgets that they are using in their bedroom, and they are sending their pictures in Japan, having a sexual intimacy on social media. So we have enhanced our curriculum, and we are in collaboration with COCTA in KwaZulu-Natal, and also looking at disclosure for adolescents and children, disclosure and adherence to treatment for the epidemic control. But I trust that you'll come on board so that we work together, because we're working in silos in these deep rural communities using the bottom-up approach that is not acknowledged, and we have documented, but it's acknowledged by other countries, but not our own local, domestic. We don't have domestic finance that support these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. I mean, I think we can go on and on around just this particular topic. I'm sure you're all burning, we are all burning in here just to respond to that, but we don't have time. But let's hope something has been ignited in us to respond. And remember, one, culture is dynamic. We also want to remember that children and issues of consent, you know, what is consent when it comes not just to a child, but anybody, because it's also about understanding what you are agreeing to and what is doing. But I think we need more discussions. I am going to allow Ms. Zanele to just respond, and then we close it because we are out of time. Where's the mic, please? I don't think Garabo is still online. So I think it's fine. Yeah.
I think I'll just respond briefly on the question around women empowerment. So from a funds perspective, we fund about 132 community-based organizations, and a lot of these community-based organizations have programs where they teach the women and the victims different skills to enable them to be economically independent. So we've got CBOs all over the country who run some of these programs. So hopefully then the women can be independent and are able to live the relationships that they're in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And once again, a big thank you to the audience. And before I close and really thank the panelists, I just want to say that, as my colleague always says, we cannot respond to HIV through biomedical interventions only. We need, and this is articulated very clearly in our National Strategic Plan of HIV, TB, and STI. We have to be responding, thinking of biomedical interventions, behavioral and structural interventions. And you can tell that really a lot lies on the structural issues. So again, CEO, if we are not focusing and paying attention on the structural issues, we may end up seeing very little success on the biomedical interventions. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much to the audience. Thank you, and over to you, Program Director.
Thank you, Tato. Thank you so much. This was so interesting. Again, we are just failed by time. We won't hold you too long. We have only two more talk of 10 minutes each or less. And my first one is, it wouldn't have been any better fitted. It's from Miss Colleen Wagner from NACOSA, who's gonna talk to us about where to from here, and the lessons learned from gender transformative approaches. I mean, Ms. Colleen is very well suited to talk about that. She has many years as a committed health promotion and disease prevention. Please come through. And with a particular focus on adolescent well-being, ensuring a smooth transition into adulthood. She has served on many forums. She has led the Zimele project at the Desmond Tutu Foundation, and she's now a grant manager of catalytic programs at NACOSA. Please welcome Ms. Colleen.
Good morning, all. I want to acknowledge CEO, and thank you to Program Director, and thank you to the team. Thank you, Koketso and the team, for welcoming me here. It is such a privilege to be able to speak on this topic. My background is actually nursing, so that's where my passion lies, in healthcare and health services. So I represent, the first slide you'll see, where to from here, lessons about gender transformative approaches to HIV and GBV. So I'm part of a team. One of the catalytic grants that we're implementing at NACOSA is this learning partnership for gender transformation in South Africa. And so this, I'm just going to give a very short overview of the grant. Next slide. Thank you. So on this slide, we can see an overview of work done globally, internationally and nationally. And it looks at evidence compiled on this topic for best evidence and best practices on building on global evidence here, as I'm saying. And so when we're starting this work now in learning partnerships for gender transformation, we are not starting from scratch. When we're having this conversation, we are all collectively building on work that has been done, and it allows us to continue to serve communities. Maybe just allow me to just read the definition for gender transformation. So gender transformative approaches seeks to challenge gender inequality by transforming harmful gender norms, roles, and relations while working towards redistributing power, resources, and services more equally. And then just allow me to read one more thing around the principles of GTA, gender transformative approaches. These include human rights as a basic right for all interventions, analyzing and critically addressing power dynamics, harmful gender norms, values, gender, and diversity, and then focusing on empowerment of women and girls and meaningfully engaging men and boys. So when you speak about gender transformation, we are not saying we're kicking out the boys and we're kicking out the men. It's also around meaningfully engaging men and boys, as we saw from previous presentations on just how much more work we still need to do in this space. Thank you. Next slide. And so building on the work conducted by all our partners internationally and nationally, we looked at some of these resources, understanding the root causes of gender-based violence and HIV. And so we see some key messages about GTA to HIV and or GBV, these shared resources. So collectively, the knowledge is telling us that we need to describe interlinkages among gender, GBV, HIV, and rights and stakeholders in your context. So if you are aligning programs, you need to first describe these interlinkages. And we've heard all morning previous speakers mentioned these. Then we need to map your HIV and or your GBV. So what we've done is we've used on our project, the World Health Organization has a gender responsive assessment scale, a GRASS scale. So we've used this as the framework for mapping HIV and GBV in our context. Then you need to conduct a detailed intersectional gender analysis. You need to design and implement your GTA approaches. And then also you need to monitor and evaluate your progress and your ongoing learning. So this is just one example. The model on the side is just one example of how it could be done. And there's a reference. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm rushing for time, but maybe I'll just take a breath in between. So I just want to share a little bit about our project. So this is a snapshot. The team is involved in a 3-year collaborative research project from 2022 till 2025, and we're drawing on unique perspectives of partners in academia. So we work with the University of the Western Cape School of Public Health, grant management, which is NACOSA as a civil society organization, and then also community-based implementation. I think program director mentioned earlier on about a bottom-up approach. So this project has really been a ground-up approach. One of our implementing partners. The program is embedded in the My Journey Adolescents and Young People program. So it's a HIV prevention program via SANAC. PRs were appointed to implement the Adolescents and Young People program in sub-districts. So we have selected one sub-district. Ages of the program is 10 to 24, and we're working in Klipfontein and Mitchell's Plain. No, sorry, only Klipfontein in the Western Cape. This local research initiative is part of an Africa-wide cohort. So they're focusing on sexual, reproductive, and maternal health rights and services called GTA for Africa. The cohort has 6 projects across 11 countries in South, East, and West Africa. Next slide, please. And then the overall aim of this research project, so I said it's jointly conceptualized and implemented by UWC School of Public Health, NACOSA, and Hope Africa, or SR, in the community. And so the overall aim is to create a collaborative community-based learning partnership that supports dialogue, exchange, and capacity strengthening, explores the use of a gender transformative approach in adolescents and young people's sexual reproductive health. And then all of this is done, leveraging this learning to influence relevant norms, structures, program systems, and policies in South Africa. Next slide, please. All right. This was a very robust and multifaceted program that we've done in the 3 years, coming to an end in the end of March. I'm just going to talk about one aspect of the entire project, and the one aspect of this project is the work that we've done with 8 male peer facilitators. So we did a gender analysis of the curricula. So these ABYM, the male facilitators, implemented 2 programs. It was a Skills Guys program implemented by Grassroots Soccer, and then the other one was a One Youth Can by Sonke Gender Justice. So we looked at those 2 programs implemented by these peer facilitators, and we did a gender analysis of the curricula using that the WHO GRASS scale. We also did 10 monthly capacity strengthening sessions with them, where they did some reflection and some understanding of themselves as males and in the spaces they work as facilitators, deep reflections. And then also we did observations of the program implementation of the Skills Guys and One Youth Can programs. And so for the last one, we did two in isiXhosa, two observations for the Skills Guys and two for the One Youth Can, of which we then worked with 90 young men in the ABYM in the community. Next slide, please. And so from all of this work, I'm going to just share two slides on findings. The first slide on the findings will be on the social and political context. So some of the reflections that these young men has been sharing, it's around the interpersonal violence, gangsterism, and trauma that they experience because they're living in the community. They're embedded in the same community that they work in. We find one of the huge reflections was on this, the IPV, the interpersonal, the violence, the gangsterism and trauma, and the contextual challenges related to the presence of gang-related interpersonal violence, a unique understanding of how endemic and normalized violence had become within our context. So I'm going to just read this one quote from one of the sessions. So one of the young men said, "This trauma thing isn't a joke, like for real. We live in these communities. We are traumatized every single day. But because of where we come from, that's the norm. They shot whoever, that's just fine. We just have we just have to hope it does not happen to us. We are all from different communities and different areas, and there might be a shooting in Mitchell's Plain, but in Guguletu, it's maybe hijackings. It's all different types of things. But it's all the same thing. Crime is crime. And the one thing that's common in every community is drugs. It's sad how all these traumatic things have become the norm, and we just have to carry it." And these are our peer facilitators that must get up every day, that must show up in programs, deliver programs, and engage young men. And it's the same with our young girls programs as well. And so this is what we are seeing, that they really carry the trauma. And then the next point that they made was around internalized harmful masculinity. So they share about the theme of shared experiences of gender socialization, tensions and challenges that they have to manage. So as they facilitate, they also need to be aware of their own masculinity, and you can't be soft. You know, then people will say derogatory terms like you're a morphe or you're a, you know, those kinds of things. So you must also be manly when you show up. So these are some of the social and political findings. The next slide. It's got on organizational context. So while these programs have potential, organizational contexts don't provide sufficient resources to properly implement HR, financial capacity, and M&E systems. So we know, for example, in some of the donor-funded programs, there could be a moratorium on how many staff you can appoint, or, you know, just M&E systems that are complex. And so just managing that becomes a challenge. So after a 5-day orientation training with a curricula, so either one of the two that I've mentioned, the participant facilitators are then expected to replicate the training as facilitators. Remember, these are peers. So they get a 5-day course, and then off you go, and you must now replicate as facilitators. Facilitators shared how they did not feel sufficiently equipped to transition into such a role, and suggest some of the more challenging topics like SOGESC. Facilitators were also required to navigate the complexity of the curricula within a limited time frame and targets. So again, one of the quotes from the sessions was one of the peer facilitators said, "I feel like preparation is key for this line of work because participants can smell if you don't know what you're doing, and they can see it, and once they know that you are weak, they're going to jump on you." So this is as you are presenting. So the cost of inaction is not only financial, but also human rights and to social justice. Tackling the root causes is essential, and this is why gender transformative approaches is central to GBV and HIV intersections. Just one next slide. So this is the last slide coming up now, the next one, sorry. We'll just talk about recommendations. So we've got 2 recommendations only. And of the 2 recommendations, it's about the need to systemically integrate gender and gender transformation. So basically what this is saying is you need to start thinking about program design, M&E systems, program implementation, all of that. When you're thinking about HIV and GBV programs, you need to integrate gender transformative approaches into all of these. And then the second recommendation is about integrating funding for GTA processes. So again, when we negotiate funding, when we negotiate with donors and grants, it is important to integrate funding into these models and maybe additional for capacity building for implementing teams. Thank you. I was rushing in the end.
Thank you so
Let's-
much. Thank you.
I think
Thank
that's the
you.
end. Thank
That
you.
was really good. And
There was just a last slide, sorry, gentlemen. There was just the last slide with the contact details for the PI.
oh, wonderful.
And thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. All these will be distributed, I guess, to the participants, so you'll have the contact details. Thank you. This was, again, one, it's a pity we don't have time, that we could have expanded on, because it's a clear case of how you can actually do gender transformative approaches, which gives you better results and more sustainable results. Anyways, so we're going to finish in style. We kept the best for last. And we have Dr. Tembi, the SANAC CEO, to talk to us about strategic reflection on why it's important to have partnerships to address both HIV and GBV. Please, Dr. Tembi. While she comes, I just want to tell you, I've been, by the way, massacring all the bios because of lack of time. But Dr. Tembi is a certified director of the Institute of Directors of Southern Africa, and she has a multiverse experience in national and international fora. I'm not lying. I have it written. And she has previously served on boards of a AIDS Foundation, Right to Care, and Alexander Forbes Community Trust, and she's now the current SANAC CEO. The floor is yours, madam.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I am standing here recognizing that the room is not particularly full, and maybe it's because the subject matter that we are gathered on is nothing but joyous, anything but joyous. But without excluding amadoda, obaba, the men, the boys, without excluding abantwana, ogogo, without excluding people with disabilities, I'm going to proceed as planned and greet the program director, Jackie. Well done. Good to see you. I'm going to greet the CEO of the GBV Response Fund, Ms. Zanele Ngwepe. Ngibonge Dr. Mpumi Zungu from the HSRC, the Director of Child Law at the University of Pretoria, Ms. Karabo Azo, the leadership from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Dr. Shaira Omar from the Teddy Bear Clinic. In absentia, I would like to greet the Gugu Dlamini Foundation. SANAC remains ever so grateful to the foundation and the family because they actually allowed us to name one of our, in fact, our biggest boardroom, if I'm not mistaken, the second largest one after Gugu Dlamini. So please give them a round of applause in absentia. Ms. Phumzile Ndlovu from Bridging the Gap, South Africa. Distinguished guests, partners, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to all of you. Apologies that I joined you a bit late. I had a board committee meeting from 9 a.m., which I had to take from a private room just next door. I had to be close to the action in case I heard some singing, then I would have asked to be excused. I work with a lot of civil society colleagues. So, as I said, without excluding amadoda, abantwana, or gogo, people with disabilities, I'm going to ask Mandisa, not Mandisa Dlamini, Mandisa Tukashe, to start a song that I would like you to sing to allow me to strategically wrap up everything that you've heard today. leli lizwe lamakhosikazi. Asoze aphela amandla, asoze aphela ilizwe lamakhosikazi.
Azoze aphela amandla. Azoze aphela amandla. Azoze aphela amandla.
Bambe comrades, bambe. Wethu. Phansi ngokuhlukunyezwa kwabafazi phansi. Phansi ngestigma phansi. Phansi ngokuhlukunyezwa kwamadoda phansi. Phansi ngokuhlukunyezwa kwabantwana phansi. Forward with strategic partnerships, forward. Hallelujah. Amen. All right, that was a good start, wouldn't you say? Let me begin by thanking our partners for this engagement, the GBV Response Fund and the Mail and Guardian for this initiative, as well as Sasol for hosting us at this beautiful venue. Such is the power of strategic partnerships for greater good. As I said earlier, I do wish we were gathered here for a more joyous occasion. However, the subject matter for today is anything but joyous. South Africa continues to carry the largest burden of the HIV epidemic in the world. A total of 7.8 million people are living with the virus in South Africa today. And as you have heard throughout all the speakers, we simultaneously are grappling with unacceptably high rates of gender-based violence and femicide. And these dual epidemics disproportionately affect women, they affect men, they affect young girls, they affect other key and vulnerable and priority populations. As you would have heard from the HSRC, the first South African national gender-based violence estimates indicate that 7.3 million women have experienced physical violence in their lifetime. These figures are not coincidental, but rather confirm what we already know in terms of the scourge of GBVF, that it has indeed reached epidemic levels in our country, a common trend for countries that have got a high burden of HIV. The previous and the current National Strategic Plan for HIV, TB, and STIs, the previous one ended in 2023, the current one ends in 2028, actually identify GBV as one of the social and structural drivers of the HIV epidemic. Survivors of GBV are at higher risk of contracting HIV, and people living with HIV are more likely to experience GBV. We have actually looked at the intersectionalities between the two NSPs. That team, led by Nozugo, actually took the time. They took the NSP for GBV. There is little Koketso there. Hello, Koketso. So they took the NSP for GBV, and they took the NSP for HIV, TB, and STIs, and they looked at the intersectionalities. Some of the ways in which GBV and HIV intersect include coercive sex. Survivors of GBV may be forced to have sex without protection, increasing their risk of contracting HIV. Number two, it's the power dynamic. GBV can be used as a means of exerting power and control over someone, including controlling their access to HIV testing, to HIV treatment and prevention services, as well as just the basic ability to negotiate condom use. We know that the condom is the single most cost-effective intervention when it comes to HIV and STI and unwanted pregnancy prevention in this country. But we also know from data from the HSRC that condom use is at its ultimate low in this country at this moment. That is disappointing. Stigma and shame. Survivors of GBV may experience stigma and shame, which can prevent them from seeking help or from disclosing their HIV status. Access to services, that's number 4. Survivors of GBV may face barriers in accessing HIV testing, treatment, and prevention services, including condoms and pre-exposure prophylaxis. Given the complexity then of these intertwined challenges, there is no single organization or government entity or sector that can effectively address them alone. It's imperative that we adopt a collective, integrated, and sustained response. I'm sure you agree that there is nothing that you have not heard today that I'm telling you. I'm simply summarizing the importance of strategic partnerships, multi-sectoral coordination, and collaboration for us to move forward. Breaking the cycle of HIV and GBV requires a collaborative, multi-stakeholder approach that delivers comprehensive and effective interventions. To achieve this, we must focus on the following areas. Multi-sectoral collaboration. Evidence shows that the tackling of these epidemics in isolation are ineffective. We've just seen it now. Therefore, coordinated efforts are essential where government departments, the private sector players, civil society organizations, healthcare providers, law enforcement agencies, and community leaders, to mention but a few, work together to implement policies and programs that are addressing GBV. Now, working together is not enough. The key is accountability. It's been mentioned at this very forum that it's not just about us holding government accountable, but it's about communities being able to hold themselves accountable. It's about us being able to hold the private sector accountable, and us having an accountability framework that we actually treat these meetings. The first hour or the first day of the next one should be an accountability reporting forum where we say, what did we agree to and what have we achieved? Sustainable funding is the second one. Effective implementation of programs requires long-term financial investment. Partnerships with international donors, private corporations, and philanthropic organizations can help to mobilize and allocate resources towards ending GBV and HIV. I mention this on purpose because the current shift in the geopolitics lays no doubt to the fact that we need to mobilize for increased domestic funding. The time for reliance on external funding is over. It's time for the chaos that we are in to unleash the great potential of this country of South Africa. So the government, please feel free, shani izandla bazalwane, shani izandla. The current chaos needs to unleash our great potential. And we do know that our current response, especially for HIV and TB, is 76 funded by the government at facility level, but we are looking at strengthening community projects that were funded by the likes of PEPFAR, especially for key and vulnerable populations, and to make sure that those continue with funding from the fiscus. Now, the scenario that was mentioned by Nakosa is one that is extremely heartbreaking because the people that are working in those conditions actually require something called danger pay. You can imagine if that's what the situation looks like. And that is where you need to start considering that donors themselves are facing other dangers. HIV is no longer a poster child. GBV might be a pandemic for us, but people are worried about climate change. They are worried about war. They are worried about migration. There are other issues. So the domestic funding has to kick in for us to be able to take care of our social and structural issues that are driving our HIV pandemic. Integration of services, I think, has been mentioned multiple times. Integration of the GBV response into HIV services, into TB services, into other chronic services. Because when you come for GBV, it shouldn't be a problem to take that one drop of blood and to test for HIV, for blood sugar, and for cholesterol. It would be killing 3 or 4 birds with one stone. Incorporating GBV screening and support services within HIV prevention and treatment programs ensures that those at risk receive comprehensive care without stigma or discrimination. Why should there be a particular corner that labels you that here sit the victims of GBV? Here sit the clients that are on ARVs. The minute we start service integration, even speaks to the better utilization of resources, because with the little that we have, there is no doubt that we need to do better by integrating to stretch each rand and to stretch each dollar, as we tend to say. So all facilities should provide survivors of GBV with access to medical care, legal assistance, and psychosocial support from a central point of integrated care. Community engagement and awareness has also been discussed in detail. Engaging individuals, families, communities is essential in changing harmful social norms and promoting gender equality. Community leaders, traditional authorities, and faith-based organizations should play a role in awareness campaigns, encouraging prevention efforts, and fostering meaningful societal change. Now, you can imagine that this becomes quite difficult in areas where government, for instance, does not have access to do DNA testing and it's a case of sexual assault. We've had these reports in KwaZulu-Natal where victims of gender-based violence end up being exposed to so-called perpetrators before they are charged because it takes so long for the DNA test to be done. It has to be taken from KZN to another province, and during that time, the perpetrator is out, or the alleged perpetrator is then out on bail. So those are the kind of issues that we need to be talking about, investing domestic infrastructure into making sure that those tests are available locally so that we are able to solve such issues. Hence, when we say social, structural, policy, systemic issues, it's not so much about what's on paper, but what we are implementing. Policy and legal frameworks, government departments, advocacy groups must collaborate to enforce laws that protect the rights of women, girls, and vulnerable populations. Strong policies should criminalize GBV and ensure that access to justice happens and they provide legal protection to people living with HIV and survivors of violence. Just before I end, I am going to medicalize the response a bit because we all know that social and structural issues are quite difficult to bridge. As we speak now, the issue of ukutwala is back. And we've been speaking about it for the longest time. And it's not back as a traditional, normal practice. It's a crime, what's happening. Because the way it's being done, it's children under 16, it's 14-year-old, it's women without their consent, and it is a crime. So Tato, please allow me to medicalize the response just a little bit. I'm a clinician. I don't know about the rest of what Jacqueline was reading. That's not me. But I'm just a girl from Guamashu who went to medical school. And I want to check, how many of us know of the injectable 6-monthly pre-exposure prophylaxis? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've seen 8 hands in the room. And this is the closest thing that we have got to prevention at the moment. Everybody is talking lenacapavir, but if we are not doing a bottom-up approach like was being said, people don't know about it. Because in order to issue lenacapavir, which is a new 6-monthly injection that prevents you from acquiring HIV when you are HIV negative and you have a sexual encounter with somebody that's HIV positive, it allows you protection for a period of 6 months. If we are offering lenacapavir, the decisions should not be made at board level or at policy level where Tembi sits. We need to be going to the communities, explaining what is this lenacapavir? What does it do? What will it do to your body? and then let the communities decide who are the people that should get it. Shayani izandla bazalwane. It mustn't be us who sit in the boardrooms and decide, oh no, we are going to start with key populations. It's going to be a, we need to allow the people to decide. Hallelujah. Next, we are aware that there is also the dapivirine ring, which is the vaginal ring that you insert that releases antiretroviral therapy for a period of 28 days for people that are not able to negotiate condom use. It's available for female use at the moment, and we are also talking now about a 3-monthly ring, which is on its way. But the oral PrEP is available for both men and women. But the uptake amongst men is appalling. Why are men not using PrEP? You know, yesterday a story was told when the minister launched the 1.1 million campaign. And he said, it's not a nice story, but he's going to tell it. He said, if men had to be sent to the moon for 10 years and come back, HIV would be gone. But I think where it went a bit square was he said he would stay in order to be the minister, in order to be the Minister of Health and to drive the program. So men, please know, PrEP is an option, but it's not just for women. It's for you as well. Oral PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. It prevents you from acquiring HIV. It's a pill that you pop once a day, and it makes sure that where you are not able to negotiate, you are able to protect yourself. Once you are on antiretroviral treatment, and I'm sticking onto this prevention route because when GBV happens, we spoke about how when you are exposed to GBV, you have a high likelihood of developing HIV. But if you are on PrEP, or if you are U equals U and on treatment, then your chances of transmitting HIV or acquiring it become lower. So we launched the 1.1 million campaign yesterday, and it's based on the fact that UNAIDS has given the country the 95, 95, 95 targets. On the second 95, the country is on 79%. We are not doing well. And in order for us to get to the second 95, we need to find 1.1 million people. Now, what that means is we had to look at the data, and the data tells us that men are not coming to facilities. So we are looking for the men. But the men have raised their hands themselves. There is a campaign called Better Men for Tomorrow. The men are saying, not in our name. We are going to come forward. We are going to tell you where to find us. Because when we speak as policymakers, we say, men are not at church and they are not in the clinic. They are in the workplaces. Maybe they're in the taverns. I don't know. But wherever they are, let them tell us so we can go there to find them. But the men are saying, let us lead. Let us tell you. Let us tell you what are the things that deter us from coming to health facilities. You know, personally, I'm still convinced that having had an uncle and a father who was a male, it's more than just the issue of stigma and healthcare worker attitudes. I think men are just afraid. You know, I think deep down in there, there's a little boy who is just scared that once I go to a clinic, it means there must be something severely wrong with me. Can I give you men assurance after having had 2 children and having had to go to a clinic when I was well? When I was pregnant, I was not sick. I was just going to ANC. There is absolutely nothing wrong with testing for your prostate-specific antigen, testing for your blood sugar, so everything works well at home, because once the blood sugar is high, many other things are affected. Testing for TB, because TB is the #1 killer of men in South Africa. So men, sondelan, qina ndoda. Ndoda, sondela, ndoda. Qina, ndoda. So sondelani ema-clinic so we can assist you. And then lastly, we need to considering our economic climate and limited resources that are available, as well as the fragmented responses, it's no longer viable for us to not integrate. We need to foster collaboration, promote integration, uphold our shared responsibility, and create a society where individuals, families, communities are free from violence and are able to access dignified health and social services that they deserve. Ngiyabonga kakhulu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, CEO. You see, I didn't lie when I said we are finishing in style, right? And she's even done my job. She summarized. This is why I love her. Thank you very much. And mine is just to thank you, Ms. Zanele, Koketso, Dr. Tembi, and your team, and Mel and Guardian for remembering the UN and making us always participate in your good stories. I'm so glad this conversation has continued because it had started a long time ago. I am convinced that everyone here heard that they will keep you accountable. Have you heard that? That you'll keep them accountable for delivering together, for ensuring that the interlinkages don't remain only on a framework, but are actually implemented, for ensuring participation of all relevant stakeholders, including a bottom-up approach, for ensuring that prevention and to ensure accountability, prevention, and implementation of the NSP, for addressing the hidden structural drivers of both HIV and GBV, which were highlighted here, some of them being still issues of lack of access to human rights, lack of access to legal services, issues of harmful norms, which were big and almost sparked a big debate, issues of actual socioeconomic dependency of women that allows power imbalance in relationships, issues of addressing other sorts of gender inequalities. There is also a need to adopt gender transformative approaches in responding to GBV and HIV. So these are the commitments that we heard them abide to, and we're going to keep them accountable. The issue of strategic partnership is key. And also, how do we define strategic partnerships, especially in the current context? And accountability framework, like Dr. Tembi says, to hold implementing partners accountable, and sustainability of the response for both HIV and GBV requires strategic conversation. With that, I wish you a bon appetit and a good drive or walk or commuting back home. Thank you.